Okay, let's look at the effect of light on photosynthesis then. Just a brief video on this. We just want to look at sort of practically what's happening. So this would be considerations, say, for a horticulturalist, looking at trying to maximize their yields or maximize their produce, the levels of produce that they're getting. So you can imagine a situation where the rate of photosynthesis is all about what the rate of photosynthesis effectively is, the rate of growth. So the faster the plants can photosynthesize, then the faster they can produce carbohydrate and therefore their energy supply, and so the faster they can grow, generally speaking then. So we look at, first we'll look at light intensity and how that affects the rate of photosynthesis. If you remember the experiment, photosynthesis is measured, the rate of photosynthesis can be measured by bubbles per minute if you're looking at Elodea. So in the laboratory we do this experiment where we have this aquatic plant and the amount of bubbles of oxygen that are given off is measured as a rate as a measure of the rate of photosynthesis. So BPM could be the units here, bubbles per minute, and the rate of photosynthesis. And here we have light intensity. So let's see what happens. This is the shape of the graph that you'd get. And we look at this in stage by stage. Stage one would be that down here at zero, if there's zero light, then of course there's zero photosynthesis. So that explains that. Once you start to increase the light, then you get a proportional increase in the rate of photosynthesis. So this is this directly proportional relationship between light intensity and the rate of photosynthesis, however it's measured. That, of course, can only continue, so that's, if you like, stage two, it can only continue up to a point. Now, this point here, this point is known as the saturation point. It's the light intensity at which no further increase will result in a further increase in photosynthesis, in the rate of photosynthesis. So this is the point at which there's no point in adding any more light, all other things being equal, because you won't get any increase in the rate of photosynthesis. Now the reason for that is because some other factor is limiting. So the factors that affect photosynthesis, as we know, are carbon dioxide levels, because carbon dioxide is a raw material for photosynthesis, for the production of glucose. Water is not usually a limiting factor, because water is necessary for general plant health anyway, even though it's an ingredient for photosynthesis. Water levels are generally optimized for different reasons anyway, for, like I said, general plant health and growth. And temperature would be another one. So all of those things in this situation are limiting. The other thing that could be limiting, of course, is in terms of the plant itself, could be just the amount of chlorophyll molecules that are available in its leaves, in its chloroplasts, is finite, it's limited, and so it can't really change the number of chloroplasts that it has, or the number of chlorophyll molecules that it has. It's usually, by the time it's got to this stage, that's a limiting factor as well. So we've got limiting factors of carbon dioxide, of temperature, and chlorophyll, availability of chlorophyll molecules, resulting in what we call the saturation point. Now the saturation point is like we said, in a situation where all of the things are constant, and so increase in the light intensity will have no effect, and that's why we get this flat line, which results in no increase in photosynthesis, even though we increase the light intensity. Now we'll just flick through that. We've already talked about that. We can change this situation if we throw carbon dioxide into the mix, and for if you like the high-tech end of the horticultural business, where particularly in the case of produce that's going to be a valuable sort of a valuable crop, then so in greenhouses it's possible to, with careful ventilation and with supplementary carbon dioxide, you can add extra CO2 to the atmosphere and control those levels of CO2 with timers, like I said, and with timed ventilation schemes, and like I said, some method of increasing the CO2 levels in the air, usually by just adding tanks of CO2 with valves on timers and CO2 gas is injected into the atmosphere and the plants periodically. So if we look at this situation, this would be where we had our normal amount of CO2 available to the plant. But if we, and that would be about, generally speaking, in the air between about 0.1% in a greenhouse, that can be increased to 0.2. And you see, as a result of that, you get an increase in the potential possible rate of photosynthesis, therefore an increase in growth rate, just by doubling the amount of CO2. And what's important about this also, if you notice, is that the saturation point has now shifted. The saturation point was here when we had 0.1% CO2. But because of the extra CO2 in the air, now these plants are able to use more of the light that's available. So by adding more CO2 into the mix, it becomes less of a limiting factor. Obviously it becomes limiting at this point again. So again, the availability of CO2 is now limiting. We could try increasing it again. What we find is that up to 0.5% we can get a further shift in our saturation point. So we've got these three saturation points now. Z is the point at which the light intensity at which above which there's no more point in increasing the light. At 0.5% CO2, now there's no point in increasing this beyond 0.5% either. You won't get an increase in the rate, and you won't get a shift of the saturation point. So this is, if you like, now we've maxed out the amount of CO2. The potential of adding CO2 is now fully used up, if you like. So there's no point in adding any more than 0.5% final concentration to the atmosphere inside your greenhouse. So what's left with there is, to some extent, the temperature, though usually that is something that is well controlled in greenhouses, but temperature of course is going to come into play, and it'll depend on the strain, as do all of these things. Different plants will be able to use light differently depending on their photosynthetic sort of machinery or capabilities, and different plants will be able to use will like some temperatures or higher temperatures than others, and again, like I said, that's going to be strain dependent. So at 0.1%, just to summarize, saturation point was at this lower level. If we increase it to 0.2, then double it, then we can shift the saturation point, and we get an increase in the photosynthesis, rate of photosynthesis, up to and including 0.5%, after which there's no point in increasing the CO2 level, like I said. Okay, so to summarize then, what you would do as a horticulturalist, if you're a commercial grower of food crops or flowers or something, then under glass you would increase the amount of light. You would supplement, or you solely use artificial lighting. Usually it's supplementary, added to the freely available sunlight, but that would vary depending on the time of year how much artificial light would be added. Like we saw, there's up to a certain point it's worth adding, and then after which you reach a saturation point. So extra light, extra carbon dioxide, again up to a point of 0.5%. You would optimize the watering, something that you would do anyway. You would optimize that using timers and by experimentation, depending on the strain that you're using. And you would also have to optimize your ventilation routine to ensure not just that you are even if you weren't using carbon dioxide, you would want to be removing the waste product, the O2, that's going to build up, which is going to increase in concentration and therefore effectively reduce the amount of the amount of CO2, or the CO2 concentration inside your greenhouse. So you want to be removing that, but you also want to be in general, in a greenhouse, you would want to be bringing in fresh air consisting of carbon dioxide, which the plants would need. Now, if you're supplementing that with CO2, then you're really concentrating on removal of the oxygen. And of course, like we said, you would want to optimize your temperature, and that would vary. During the daylight hours, you would want to have it at a higher temperature than you would at night time, when photosynthesis isn't happening. Then the temperatures would be lower. But you would vary the heat and optimize the temperature depending on the plant that you're growing.